He hid from the cold with an Apache girl, unaware that destiny had brought them together. The cold was biting, sharper than James had ever felt. Each gust of wind cut through his thick jacket, and his fingers felt like they were turning to ice despite the gloves he wore. The road ahead was barely visible, covered in a thick layer of snow, and the headlights of his old car barely penetrated the grayish haze of the storm. He had been driving for hours, trying to reach the next town, but the snow had come suddenly, faster and heavier than he expected. It seemed like the world around him had disappeared under a blanket of white. James had always enjoyed the quiet of winter, the way the snow muffled sounds and made everything seem still. But now, in the middle of this storm, he realized how unprepared he was. The car had slipped on the icy road a few times, and he had nearly lost control. Eventually, the engine had given up, leaving him stranded on a lonely, winding road with no sign of life for miles. The thought of spending the night in the cold, alone, made his chest tight. He knew he had to find shelter, or he might not survive the night. He trudged through the snow, each step taking more effort than the last. His boots were soaked, and the cold had begun to seep into his bones. The wind pushed against him, threatening to knock him over, but he kept moving, driven by the simple instinct to survive. Hours seemed to pass, though it might have only been minutes when in the distance he saw a faint wisp of smoke rising into the gray sky. His heart leapt. Smoke meant fire, fire meant warmth, and warmth meant safety. He followed the smoke, stumbling through the snow-covered path, hoping it wasn't a mirage or a trick of the storm. As he drew closer, he could make out the shape of a small cabin, hidden among a cluster of pine trees. It was modest, old, and unassuming, but it radiated warmth and safety. James approached slowly, not sure if anyone was home or if he would be turned away. His breath formed clouds in front of him, and the snow crunched under his boots. Each step carried a mixture of relief and nervousness. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His knuckles were red from the cold as he knocked, and he waited, unsure if anyone would answer. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and a young woman appeared. She had dark hair tied back loosely, and her eyes were sharp but not unkind. She looked him up and down, noting his soaked clothes and shivering form. "You're freezing," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "Come inside before you catch your death." James stumbled into the cabin, grateful beyond words. The warmth hit him immediately, and he could feel his fingers slowly regaining some feeling. He noticed the small fire burning in the hearth, the smell of burning wood mixing with something earthy and comforting. The cabin was simple but cozy, filled with handmade furniture and decorations that reflected a connection to the land and tradition. "I'm James," he said, finally finding his voice. His teeth still chattered, and he rubbed his hands together by the fire. "I'm Ayana," the young woman replied. There was a pause as if she was weighing whether to trust him. Then she gestured to a chair. "Sit. You need to warm up. I can make you some tea." James nodded, sitting down gratefully. The fire's warmth spread through his body, and he finally allowed himself to breathe. He couldn't help but notice her movements, graceful, careful, and unhurried. She moved around the small kitchen area, lighting another small fire in the stove and putting a kettle on it. Everything she did seemed deliberate, as if every motion had a purpose. As he warmed himself by the fire, James felt a mix of awe and curiosity. He didn't know much about the people of this land, but Ayana's presence felt grounded, strong, and unshakable. He noticed her glance at him occasionally, her eyes observant but not intrusive. There was a quiet strength about her, a sense that she had lived in these mountains for a long time and knew them better than anyone. The kettle whistled and she poured the hot tea into a small cup, handing it to him. James took it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep through him. The tea was strong, earthy, and comforting, a taste he would not forget. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. He didn't want to speak too much yet, not knowing if it was safe to share his story. but he felt an unusual sense of trust, an instinct telling him that this was a safe place, at least for now. "You must be tired," Iana said. "Do you want to rest?" "There's a spare blanket in the corner." James nodded, unable to find the words. He took the blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, feeling a sense of safety he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the storm continued to rage, the wind howling and the snow falling relentlessly. Inside, the cabin felt like a sanctuary, a small pocket of warmth in a cold, unforgiving world. As he sat there, sipping the tea, James thought about the strange turn of events that had brought him here. If he had left the road a few minutes earlier or later, he might have ended up somewhere else entirely. Fate, he realized, had led him to this small cabin in the mountains, and perhaps to Iana herself. Iana watched him quietly, noting the way he held the cup, the way his eyes wandered around the room, taking in every detail. There was a story in his expression, one of exhaustion, of long journeys, and perhaps even of loss. She didn't ask questions immediately. Instead, she focused on the fire, adding a few logs to keep it burning bright. There was something in the way she cared for the cabin, for the space around her, that spoke of patience and resilience. They sat in quiet companionship for a while, listening to the storm outside. James found comfort in the silence, in the unspoken understanding that they were both weathering the same storm, albeit in different ways. There was a rhythm to their silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire or the hiss of the tea kettle. As the evening wore on, Iana brought out a small meal, simple but nourishing. Bread, cheese, and dried meat, all arranged neatly on a wooden plate. James ate gratefully, feeling the warmth of both the food and the cabin enveloping him. He realized that moments like this, moments of shared humanity and kindness, were rare in his life. He didn't know her, yet she had given him shelter, warmth, and care without expecting anything in return. By the time the meal was finished, the storm outside had not relented, but inside, James felt a sense of peace. He leaned back in the chair, feeling the fire on his face, and thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought him here. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how long he would stay, but for the first time in hours he felt safe. Iana, meanwhile, moved about the cabin, tidying up and preparing for the night. She seemed calm, almost serene, despite the storm outside. There was a strength in her presence, a quiet confidence that made James feel both humbled and inspired. He realized that this encounter, unexpected and sudden, might be the beginning of something far more significant than a simple act of shelter from the cold. As night fell, James wrapped himself tightly in the blanket, the fire casting warm shadows on the walls. The wind outside continued its relentless dance, but he felt protected. In the quiet of the cabin, with Iana moving softly about her home, he felt a connection to something larger than himself, a sense that destiny had, in some subtle way, brought them together. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The morning sunlight barely pierced through the thick curtains of snow outside, but inside the small cabin, warmth and life filled the room. James stirred under the heavy blanket, blinking as he adjusted to the dim light. The events of the previous night seemed almost unreal. The storm, the cold, the way a stranger's kindness had saved him. He sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from sleeping on the hard wooden chair. Iana was already awake, moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. She filled a kettle with water and set it on the small stove, then opened a small cupboard to gather ingredients for breakfast. Her movements were calm and practiced, as though every step was part of a routine she had known all her life. James watched her for a moment, noting the grace and patience in her actions. It amazed him how someone could remain so composed even in the middle of such a harsh winter. "Good morning," Iana said softly when she noticed he was awake. Her voice was gentle yet firm, carrying the kind of confidence that comes from years of living close to nature. "Good morning," James replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Thank you again for letting me stay here. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Yana smiled slightly but didn't comment further. She handed him a cup of tea, the steam rising in front of his face, bringing a comforting warmth to his chilled senses. James took it gratefully, feeling the soothing taste of the strong, earthy tea wash over him. Breakfast was simple: bread, eggs, and some dried berries, but it was enough to give James energy. As they ate, the snowstorm continued outside, the wind pressing against the cabin walls. James glanced out the window, marveling at how the world seemed both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. After breakfast, Ayanna suggested that James help her with some chores. He hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted his assistance, but her calm insistence encouraged him. He found himself chopping wood for the fire, stacking it neatly, and helping to clean the small cabin. The work was hard and his muscles ached, but it felt good to contribute. For the first time in a long while, he felt useful and part of something larger than himself. While they worked, they began to talk, cautiously at first. James shared small details about his life, where he had come from, his job in the city, and how he had ended up on the mountain. He didn't tell her everything. Some stories were too personal, too painful. But the fragments he shared were enough to show that he wasn't just a traveler lost in the storm. He was a man with struggles, with hopes, and with a past that shaped him. Iana listened quietly, her dark eyes attentive. When she spoke, it was with care and thoughtfulness. She told him about her life in the mountains, about the land and the traditions her family had kept for generations. She spoke of the seasons, the plants and animals, and the stories passed down from her grandmother. James found himself fascinated, realizing how little he knew about a way of life so different from his own. "You must find it strange," she said at one point, pausing as she tied a bundle of firewood, "how someone from the city ends up here in the middle of all this snow and isolation." James shook his head. "It is strange," he admitted, "but I also feel peaceful here. There's something about this place. Even the storm feels like it belongs." Iana looked at him for a long moment, as if considering his words. There was a hint of a smile on her lips, though she didn't say anything. Her silence spoke volumes. It was the kind of understanding that doesn't need words, the kind that forms between people who are both learning to trust each other. The day stretched on. They worked together, prepared meals, and even repaired a part of the cabin that had been damaged by the snow. Each task, though simple, became a way for them to connect. James found that he enjoyed her company more than he expected. There was a rhythm to their interactions, a flow that felt natural and comforting. As the afternoon sun struggled to shine through the thick clouds, James suggested they go outside for a short walk, despite the snow still falling lightly. Gianna agreed, bundling up and leading him to a small path that wound around the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood. The snow was deep, and each step required effort, but the world outside the cabin was breathtaking. Snow-laden trees created a canopy overhead, and the mountains stretched endlessly in the distance, white and untouched. James felt a sense of awe as he looked at the scene. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. In the city, nature was something he admired from afar, seen through car windows or from the top of buildings. Here, it surrounded him completely, immersive and raw. He realized how disconnected he had been from the world, and for the first time in years, he felt alive in a way he hadn't felt before. Gianna moved easily through the snow, her familiarity with the terrain evident. She stopped occasionally to point out tracks in the snow, deer, rabbits, even a fox that had passed by recently. James listened, absorbing every word, feeling a growing respect for her knowledge and her connection to the land. They returned to the cabin as the sun began to dip below the mountains. The sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, reflecting off the snow in a gentle glow. Inside, the fire burned bright, and the cabin felt warmer than ever. James and Ayanna prepared a simple dinner together, sharing small laughs and stories as they worked. After the meal, they sat by the fire, sipping tea and watching the flames dance. The snowstorm had lessened, leaving only a quiet hush over the mountains. James realized how much he enjoyed simply being near her, sharing the quiet moments without the need for constant conversation. There was a comfort in their presence together, a sense that even strangers could become allies in the face of nature's challenges. "You're good at this," James said finally, nodding toward the fire and the cabin. "I mean, surviving out here living like this. I wouldn't last a week." Ayanna shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's what I know. My family has lived here for generations." "You learn to respect the land, to listen to it, and it will guide you." James nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized how little he knew about living simply, about being in tune with the world around him. The city had taught him efficiency and speed, but the mountains were teaching him patience and humility. And somehow, Ayanna was teaching him more than either. As night fell, they prepared for sleep. James wrapped himself in the warm blanket again, feeling the residual warmth from the fire. Ayanna tucked herself into a corner of the cabin, her movements quiet and measured. The trust between them had grown subtly, yet significantly. What had started as a chance encounter in the snowstorm was now becoming something deeper. A bond formed through shared experiences, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding of each other's humanity. Before drifting off to sleep, James thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. A stranger in a snowstorm, finding shelter with a young woman he had never met before, yet it all felt strangely meant to be. The idea of destiny seemed less like a story, and more like a quiet truth he could feel in his heart. The night was long, but for the first time in a long while, James slept peacefully, warmed not just by the fire, but by a sense of safety and connection that he hadn't known he needed. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, covering the world in white, but inside the cabin, two people had found a sense of warmth that neither the cold nor the storm could touch. And so, in the quiet of the snowy mountains, James and Ayanna began to learn about each other. Their lives had intersected in an unexpected way, and though they didn't yet know what the future held, the foundation of trust and understanding had been laid. The snowstorm had brought them together, but it was their patience, curiosity, and willingness to connect that was beginning to bind them in a way that neither could ignore. The morning began quietly, with a soft, pale light filtering through the thick curtains of snow that blanketed the mountains outside. James awoke slowly, stretching and rubbing his sore muscles. Despite the warmth of the fire, he felt the lingering chill from the previous days. He could hear the distant howl of the wind, stronger now, warning that the storm outside was far from over. Ayanna was already awake, tending to the small fire in the hearth. She moved with her usual calm, but James noticed a small tension in her movements. The wind had picked up during the night, and the cabin groaned slightly under the pressure of the snow piled high on the roof. It was a reminder that life in the mountains was not just beautiful, it was demanding and often unforgiving. "Looks like the storm isn't going anywhere today," Ayanna said, her voice soft but steady. "We'll have to stay inside until it passes." James nodded. "I don't mind," he admitted. "There's something peaceful about staying here with you, even while the snow rages outside." Ayanna glanced at him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of amusement and caution. "It's peaceful, yes," she agreed, "but it's also a test. Life here isn't easy, and it teaches you patience and resilience. The storm is part of that lesson." James took a moment to watch her, noticing the quiet confidence in her demeanor. She was strong, capable, and unafraid of the challenges that the mountains presented. He realized that the storm outside was more than just snow and wind. It was a symbol of the hardships and trials that awaited anyone who chose to live in this remote place. They spent the morning inside, tending to chores and preparing for the long day ahead. James helped Ayanna gather firewood, stacking it carefully near the stove to ensure the cabin would stay warm. The work was repetitive and tiring, but it brought a sense of rhythm to the day. Every movement, every action, required thought and attention. It was a far cry from the fast-paced life James had known in the city, where tasks were rushed and efficiency was everything. As they worked, their conversation grew deeper. James found himself opening up more, sharing fragments of his past that he had not mentioned before. He told Ayanna about his family, the struggles he had faced, and the choices that had led him to this remote part of the mountains. Each word was spoken with care, as if he were testing the waters of trust, unsure how much to reveal. Ayanna listened silently, her expression thoughtful. When she spoke, it was with wisdom and insight. She shared stories of her family, the land, and the traditions that had been passed down through generations. She spoke of the connection she felt to the mountains, the animals, and the changing seasons. James listened, captivated by her words, realizing how little he knew about a life so deeply entwined with nature. By midday, the storm had intensified. Snow battered the small windows of the cabin, and the wind whipped around the structure with increasing force. The world outside had become a white blur, and James felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. For the first time, he truly understood the challenges of survival in such an environment. Ayanna remained calm, moving about the cabin with purpose and efficiency. She prepared meals, tended the fire, and checked the supplies, all while maintaining a quiet vigilance over James. Her actions spoke volumes about her resilience and resourcefulness. She was not just surviving the storm, she was thriving despite it. As the hours passed, the cabin became both a refuge and a test. The storm outside was relentless, and the two of them were confined to a small space, forced to navigate each other's personalities and habits. James's impatience and city-born habits occasionally clashed with Ayanna's measured and deliberate approach to life. Small frustrations arose. James would accidentally knock over a stack of firewood or struggle to follow her precise instructions for preparing food. At first, these moments created tension. James felt embarrassed and frustrated by his own clumsiness, while Ayanna's calm corrections sometimes felt like subtle judgments. But slowly, through shared effort and patience, they began to learn how to cooperate. Each challenge became an opportunity to understand and respect each other's strengths and weaknesses. During one particularly long afternoon, James accidentally spilled water on the wooden floor while fetching a kettle. Ayanna sighed quietly, wiping it up with a towel, but instead of scolding him, she offered guidance. "It's okay," she said. "The floor can be dried. Just take your time and pay attention. That's all life asks sometimes, patience." James nodded, feeling both gratitude and humility. He realized that surviving the storm was not just about enduring the cold. It was also about learning to live in harmony with another person, to respect their space, and to trust in their guidance. Ayanna's patience and wisdom were lessons he had never expected to learn in such a harsh environment. As the evening approached, the storm showed no sign of relenting. The wind howled outside, and the snowdrifts rose higher around the cabin. James and Ayanna sat together by the fire, their movements synchronized from hours of shared labor. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with unspoken understanding. James reflected on the experiences of the day. He had come to the mountains seeking shelter from a snowstorm, but he had found much more than that. He had discovered resilience, patience, and the value of cooperation. Most importantly, he had begun to see Ayanna not just as a stranger who had offered him shelter, but as a guide, a teacher, and perhaps even a friend. Ayanna, meanwhile, observed James with quiet curiosity. She noted the way he adapted to the cabin life, how he learned quickly despite his initial struggles. She could see that he had a good heart, one that was capable of understanding and respecting the life she held dear. There was a spark in him, a willingness to learn that reminded her of the generations of her family who had survived these mountains before her. As night fell, the storm outside continued unabated, but the cabin remained a sanctuary. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light and dancing shadows on the wooden walls. James and Ayanna shared a simple meal, breaking bread together and savoring the comfort of companionship. After dinner, they settled into their respective spaces, each lost in thought. James stared into the fire, reflecting on the day's challenges and lessons. He realized how much he had taken for granted in his previous life: the ease of modern comforts, the speed of city living, and the illusion of control over his surroundings. Here in the mountains, every action had consequences and every choice mattered. Ayanna sat quietly, watching him from across the room. She understood the transformation he was undergoing, the subtle shift in perspective that came from facing the raw power of nature and relying on another person for guidance. She felt a sense of pride and responsibility, knowing that her knowledge and patience had helped him navigate the storm not just physically, but emotionally as well. As the night deepened, the storm outside seemed almost alive, a reminder of the challenges they faced together. Yet inside the cabin there was warmth, trust, and a growing bond that neither had anticipated. The storm had tested them, forcing them to confront frustration, fear, and uncertainty, but it had also brought them closer, revealing strengths and vulnerabilities in both. Before going to sleep, James looked at Ayanna with a newfound respect. "Thank you," he said softly, "not just for letting me stay here, but for everything today. I've learned more than I expected, and I can't tell you how much it means." Ayanna nodded, a small smile on her lips. "The mountains teach us in many ways," she replied. "Sometimes it's survival, sometimes it's patience, sometimes it's understanding each other. You've done well today." James felt a warmth in his chest, not just from the fire, but from the connection he felt with her. It was a bond formed in the face of adversity, strengthened by shared effort and grounded in mutual respect. The storm outside was fierce and relentless, but inside the cabin, something stronger was growing, a trust that would guide them through the days to come. As they finally settled down for the night, the wind howled and the snow fell relentlessly, covering the mountains in white. Yet James and Ayanna slept with a sense of quiet confidence, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and revealed their true selves, but it had also laid the foundation for a bond that neither time nor distance could easily break. And so, in the isolation of the snowy mountains, James and Ayanna learned the power of patience, trust, and understanding. The storm had been more than a challenge. It had been a teacher, guiding them both toward a deeper connection and a realization that even in the harshest conditions, companionship and kindness could create warmth stronger than any fire. The morning sun rose slowly over the snow-covered mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The storm that had raged for days had finally begun to ease, leaving the world outside quiet, sparkling, and almost magical. James woke with a sense of anticipation he couldn't quite explain. He had grown accustomed to the cabin and its rhythms, and the thought of another day with Ayanna brought a strange comfort and excitement. Ayanna was already awake, tending to the fire as always. She moved with her usual calm, but today, there was a softness in her expression that James noticed immediately. Perhaps it was the relief that the storm had passed, or perhaps it was the quiet satisfaction of having shared so many days with someone learning to understand her world. "Good morning," she said, looking up from the fire with a faint smile. "Good morning," James replied, feeling a warmth in his chest at the sight of her. He poured himself some tea and took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through him. Today felt different, as if the air itself carried a sense of possibility. They spent the morning as they had before, chopping firewood, tending to the cabin, and preparing breakfast. Yet there was a change in the atmosphere. Their movements were no longer cautious or tentative. They flowed together with ease, as if they had learned each other's rhythm. James found himself enjoying the simplicity of the work, the satisfaction of completing tasks, and most of all, the companionship that had quietly grown between them. After breakfast, James suggested a walk to explore the area around the cabin. The snow was still deep in places, but the paths were more manageable now that the storm had passed. Gianna agreed, bundling herself in her warm clothing, her movements effortless and familiar with the landscape. The mountains were breathtaking. The snow glistened like diamonds in the sunlight, and the trees, heavy with frost, sparkled with the morning light. James walked beside Ayana, feeling both awe and gratitude. He realized how much he had missed connecting with nature in such a direct, immediate way. The city had given him convenience, but it had never given him this feeling of being part of something larger, something enduring. As they walked, they began to talk about deeper subjects than before. James spoke of his dreams and ambitions, of the life he had imagined but never fully pursued. He confessed fears he had carried silently, worries about failure and loneliness that he had never shared with anyone. Ayana listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "It's not easy to open up," she said gently, "but sometimes sharing our fears is the first step toward understanding ourselves and each other." James felt a rush of gratitude. He had never met someone who listened with such patience and insight. It was as if she could see beyond the surface, understanding not just his words but the emotions behind them. He realized that this connection, formed in the midst of a snowstorm, was growing stronger with each passing day. They came to a clearing where the sunlight poured down uninterrupted, creating a space that felt almost sacred. James sat on a fallen log, exhausted but happy, and Ayana settled beside him. They watched the mountains in silence for a long while, the only sounds the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots and the distant call of a bird. "You've adapted well," Ayana said finally, breaking the silence. "I can see how much you've changed in just a few days. You've learned patience, respect, and understanding. It's not something everyone can do so quickly." James smiled, feeling both proud and humbled. "I've had a good teacher," he replied. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment there was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them. They spent the rest of the day in quiet exploration, moving carefully through the snow and sharing small discoveries along the way. James began to notice Ayana's deep knowledge of the land, how she could identify animal tracks, how she knew which plants could be used for food or medicine, and how she read the signs of the weather with remarkable accuracy. Each observation filled him with admiration, and he found himself eager to learn more from her. As the day wore on, they returned to the cabin, tired but fulfilled. The evening was calm, and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth. James helped Ayana with the meal, their movements synchronized effortlessly now. They shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. Each small interaction deepened their bond, creating a sense of trust and intimacy that neither had expected. After dinner, they sat together by the fire, sipping tea. James felt a strange mixture of comfort and longing, a desire to stay in this moment forever. The storm had tested them, taught them patience, and forced them to rely on each other. Now, with the world calm and peaceful outside, he could feel the strength of their connection more clearly than ever. Gianna looked at him quietly, her expression unreadable but gentle. "You've changed," she said softly. "Not just in how you handle the mountains, but in how you see the world. There's a calm in you now that wasn't there before." James felt a warmth rise in his chest, not just from her words but from the truth he saw in her eyes. "I think I've learned from you," he admitted. "You've shown me patience, resilience, and the value of understanding. I don't know how to thank you enough." Gianna smiled faintly, reaching for a small bundle of herbs she had gathered earlier. "Sometimes teaching is its own reward," she said. And sometimes the lessons we give are the ones we needed ourselves. You've reminded me that sharing what we know and care about can bring unexpected joy. The night settled in, calm and serene, with the stars beginning to sparkle in the clear mountain sky. James and Ayanna sat together in silence for a while, simply enjoying the warmth of the fire and the presence of one another. There was no need for words. The bond they shared was enough. As the fire burned lower, James felt a surge of emotion he had not fully recognized before. He realized that what had begun as a chance encounter in a snowstorm had grown into something profound, a connection that went beyond friendship or survival. He didn't yet understand what it meant or where it would lead, but he knew it was significant. Ayanna, too, felt the shift. She recognized the trust, respect, and understanding that had developed between them. It was a rare connection, one that did not come often in her life. She had opened her home to a stranger, yet she had found companionship, shared laughter, and even a quiet sense of happiness she had not expected. Before going to sleep, James took one last look at the cabin, the fire casting warm shadows across the wooden walls. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the shelter, the warmth, and the food, but for the person who had welcomed him into her life so completely. Ayanna had given him more than survival. She had given him understanding, connection, and a glimpse of a world he had never known. As the night grew deeper and the mountains settled into silence, both of them felt the quiet thrill of possibility. Their lives had intersected in the most unexpected way, but the bond they had formed was undeniable. Destiny, it seemed, had brought them together, and neither could ignore the subtle but powerful pull of that connection. James drifted to sleep with a sense of peace he had never known, warmed by the fire, the companionship, and the realization that some encounters are meant to change us in ways we cannot predict. Outside, the mountains glimmered in the moonlight, serene and eternal, while inside the cabin, two hearts quietly acknowledged the significance of what had begun in a snowstorm. And so, in the quiet of the mountains, a bond deepened, not just through shared survival, but through understanding, respect, and the subtle magic of fate. What had started as an unexpected meeting in the cold had blossomed into something neither of them could ignore, and the promise of tomorrow carried the possibility of even greater connection, discovery, and perhaps the first stirrings of something more profound. The morning. Light broke gently over the snow-covered mountains, casting long shadows and bathing the world in soft golden hues. The storm that had kept James and Ayanna confined to the cabin for days had passed entirely, leaving the mountains calm, quiet, and sparkling. Birds sang from the trees, and the world seemed to breathe again. James woke with a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that today would be different from any other day he had spent in the cabin. He moved quietly so as not to wake Ayanna, who was already tending the fire, as usual. Her movements were calm and steady, her focus on maintaining warmth and preparing breakfast. James watched her for a moment, feeling a deep appreciation for the way she lived her life, simple, deliberate, and in harmony with the mountains around her. Her quiet strength had become a guiding light for him over the past days, and he realized that he had come to rely on her presence more than he had anticipated. "Good morning," she said softly when she noticed him. Her eyes held a gentle warmth, but there was also something thoughtful in their depth. "Good morning," James replied, sipping the tea she had poured for him. "The mountains, they're beautiful today." Ayanna nodded, her gaze shifting to the vast landscape beyond the cabin. "They are," she agreed, "and they remind us that life moves in cycles. Storms come, storms go. What remains is what we build in the calm." James considered her words carefully, feeling their truth resonate within him. The storm had brought him to her cabin, forced him to rely on another person, and tested him in ways he had never imagined. Now, in the calm that followed, he understood that what had formed between them, trust, respect, and something deeper, was the lasting part. After breakfast, James and Ayanna stepped outside to survey the surroundings. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was crisp and refreshing. Every detail of the landscape seemed vivid, alive, and full of possibility. As they walked together, James realized how much he had grown in the past days, not just in his ability to survive the mountains, but in the way he viewed the world and his place in it. They returned to the cabin in the afternoon, preparing for what would come next. James knew he could not stay forever. Life in the mountains was not his reality, and he had obligations waiting for him back in the city. But leaving would not be easy. Ayanna had become more than a guide or companion. She had become a mirror, reflecting the person he wanted to be. Patient, resilient, and capable of understanding the deeper connections life offered. As the evening approached, James sat quietly by the fire, contemplating his next steps. Ayanna moved around the cabin, her movements graceful and purposeful. She seemed to sense his thoughts, her presence calm and steady, offering him reassurance without needing words. "I need to tell you something," James began carefully, choosing his words with thought. "I can't stay here forever. My life, it's back in the city, and I have responsibilities I can't ignore." But he paused, searching for the right way to express the depth of his feelings. "Being here with you, experiencing this, it has changed me. I don't know how to go back to my old life without carrying a part of this with me." Ayanna listened silently, her expression unreadable but attentive. She understood the weight of his words, the conflict between his past life and the bond they had formed. "I know," she said finally. "Life often requires difficult choices. We can't always stay where we feel safe or happy. But we can carry the lessons, the connections, and the memories with us. That is what matters." James nodded, absorbing her words. He felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude, knowing that he had to leave, but also realizing that his life had been enriched in ways he could never have anticipated. "You've taught me so much," he said softly, "about patience, about understanding, about living fully in the moment. I can't thank you enough." Ayanna smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared. "Sometimes the greatest lessons come from unexpected places and people," she replied. "You came here for shelter, and in return, you've given me companionship and perspective. That is enough." As the night settled over the mountains, James made preparations for his journey back to the city. He packed his belongings carefully, ensuring he left the cabin in order. Ayanna watched silently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride, sadness, and understanding. Their shared experiences had created something rare and meaningful, but she knew that life outside the mountains called to him. Before he left, James and Ayanna stepped outside one last time. The snow glimmered under the moonlight and the world felt peaceful and eternal. James took a deep breath, absorbing the beauty around him, and turned to Ayanna. "I will never forget this place," he said sincerely. "Or you. You've changed my life in ways I can't fully describe." Ayanna nodded, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. "And you've reminded me of the value of connection, of sharing life even for a short time. Go back to your life, James, but remember that this bond, this experience, it will always be a part of you." They embraced briefly, a gesture of trust, respect, and the deep connection they had formed. Neither needed to speak. Their hearts communicated what words could not. It was a farewell, but not an ending. The memory of the snowstorm, the cabin, and their shared days would stay with them both forever. James walked toward his car, each step heavy with emotion. The mountains stretched endlessly around him, serene and silent, yet filled with the energy of the life he had experienced there. He turned back one last time to see Ayanna standing at the cabin doorway, a small figure framed by the warm glow of the fire inside. As he drove down the winding mountain road, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had been harsh and demanding, but it had brought him to Ayanna, forced him to confront his limitations, and helped him discover strengths he hadn't known he possessed. He realized that destiny had a subtle but powerful way of guiding people, sometimes bringing them together when they least expect it. Back in the city, James resumed his daily life, but he carried the lessons of the mountains with him. The patience, resilience, and understanding he had learned from Ayana shaped his interactions with others, his perspective on challenges, and his appreciation for simple moments of connection. He found himself reflecting often on the cabin, the fire, and the girl who had taught him more than he could ever have imagined. Though the mountains and the snowstorm were far behind him, the bond he shared with Ayana remained alive in his heart. He wrote letters he never sent, thought of her daily, and cherished the memories of their shared laughter, their conversations, and the quiet moments by the fire. The experience had changed him fundamentally, giving him a sense of clarity, purpose, and appreciation for life's unexpected gifts. Months passed, and James continued to honor the lessons of the mountains in his everyday life. He approached challenges with patience, treated others with greater understanding, and embraced life with a renewed sense of gratitude. Yet, he always remembered that one snowy cabin, one stormy night, and the girl who had opened her home and her heart to a stranger in need. Ayana, too, carried the memory of James with her. She returned to her routines in the mountains, tending to the land, the animals, and the traditions of her family. But she often thought of the young man who had arrived in the snowstorm, who had learned to survive, to listen, and to grow alongside her. The experience reminded her of the power of connection, of the ways in which two lives could intersect briefly yet profoundly, leaving lasting impressions. Though their paths had diverged, both James and Ayana understood that destiny had brought them together for a reason. The mountains, the storm, and the cabin had created a space where trust, understanding, and compassion could flourish. And in that space, they had found something rare and precious, the knowledge that even fleeting encounters could change the course of a life, leaving behind warmth, wisdom, and the promise of something greater. James often found himself looking at the mountains in his dreams, the snow glistening in the sunlight, the cabin standing firm against the winter's storm, and Ayana's calm presence guiding him through both challenges and quiet moments. He understood that life would move forward, but he would carry the essence of those days with him forever. And so, the story of the snowstorm, the cabin, and the bond that formed between James and Ayana came to a close, not with an ending, but with a continuation of life shaped by kindness, trust, and the subtle, enduring power of destiny. The mountains had tested them, the storm had challenged them, but together they had discovered the most important lesson of all, that connection, empathy, and shared experience could create warmth stronger than any fire and leave a mark that time could never erase.